And here we go. So you can see, hopefully see my folder there in what we've created. So the industrial commissioning, the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is going to be a 9 document set. It originally started out as 6, but some of the sections were getting quite large. So we've split it into 9 sections here. The first one being a little bit of an introduction, but from 2 onwards is where we get into the meat of the standard. It's always been a challenge in the commissioning industry, the terminology that people are using, right? We all have different terms used on different projects in different industries, projects even within the same industry, from one client to the next client, everybody's using different terminology, and it's quite confusing. And it's understandable. There's been no standard for people to use and follow, right? So they've had to adapt and use their own terminology, and they will likely continue to use their own terminology. I don't think there's any expectation that overnight people are going to start adopting a new set of terminology. If they've got something that's working, great, they're going to keep using that. But for projects that are maybe just starting out or looking for a more structured approach to commissioning, then this set of terminology that we're putting together will kind of be like the guiding dictionary on what terms to use for commissioning. And it's extremely important because the details matter during commissioning, right? We need to be speaking the same language. And if people are using 4 or 5 different terms for system testing or dynamic commissioning, hot commissioning, cold commissioning, all those terms, it gets quite confusing, right? What are we even talking about? So let me open up this document here. So the way that this is going to be structured is we'll have a set of core commissioning terms. So the essential commissioning terms that we're going to be using, these will be the terms that define each stage of commissioning and are the commonly used terms in the industry. I don't think you're going to find anything too surprising or upsetting in there. Then there's going to be some supplemental commissioning terminology. These would be supporting terms that aren't necessarily directly 100% related to the commissioning process, but are helpful to know as support terminology. This is the one that maybe requires a bit more thought, is some of the legacy terms. So a lot of the commissioning terms that have been out there, we've been using them for decades, but they're actually causing a lot of confusion. And when these terms are bounced around, it's hard to know exactly what people are talking about. And the first primary example is the term commissioning on its own. Commissioning on its own, that term isn't really all that helpful, because what it's meant to refer to is the overall commissioning process, but I hear it often being referred to as testing, as people are doing commissioning on site. What they really mean is they're testing instrumentation or performing a high pot test. And of course, testing is one part of the commissioning process, but it's just one part, right? The term commissioning really should refer to the overall commissioning process. I also hear people use the term commissioning referring to the stage of testing following pre-commissioning and before startup. So right off the bat, the term commissioning on its own, we have to retire that term because it's not very helpful. We're going to be using more specific terms like commissioning process or dynamic commissioning or high pot testing, because the details matter during commissioning. And if we're just throwing around the term commissioning, but 6 different people think it means something different, well, that's not very helpful. Some of the other terms we might be moving away from are the terms dry, wet, hot, cold commissioning. Those in my mind have always caused confusion. Everybody asks, well, what is hot commissioning? What is cold commissioning? I see the term hot commissioning being referred to introduction of process fluids for mechanical systems, where in my mind, hot commissioning would be an electrically energized system. And I don't think there's any common understanding of what these terms actually mean or how they're used. So some of these terms we might retire as well and get more specific and granular so that there's less confusion in commissioning. So maybe with that, let me know in the chat, what are some terms that you've always found commissioning? Maybe there's some more that we should be adding to this legacy list of commissioning terms where, sure, they've been used for a while, but they're not actually helping anyone in the industry, especially people that are new to the industry, figure this out. So if you've got any suggestions on what should maybe be some of the legacy terms, shoot those in the chat. So the next important thing, there's kind of two fundamental ground rules that we need to establish here in this commissioning standard. First one is the terminology, the language that we're speaking. The second one being the roles and responsibilities. So what are the common roles that are accepted or are filled on projects for commissioning? And what are the roles and responsibilities for that particular individual? And then how do these individuals interact with others within the commissioning process or others that are supporting the commissioning process? So this will be a super helpful document that lists all of the commissioning roles that would be expected to see. And this can, of course, be scaled up or down depending on the size of the project. For example, let me just go to the table of contents here. You'll see some of the roles that are listed here. For example, a mechanical engineer, you'll likely have someone involved from leading the mechanical commissioning activities, and that could be a single role. On larger projects, maybe that role is split into 2 or 3 different people. You may have a specific HVAC commissioning lead, and then a specific rotating equipment lead, and maybe an overall mechanical commissioning lead. Or on smaller projects, maybe one individual is managing all 3 of those aspects. So it's certainly scalable depending on the size of your project. You may not have a team of 200 people that are overseeing commissioning. Maybe you've only got a team of 2 or 3. And when you see this list of roles here that are defined, you'll be able to scale up or scale down to meet your specific project needs. So that's going to be super helpful. So then the next documents is where we get into the really the nuts and bolts of the commissioning process. So ICA 004 is our commissioning strategy and planning document. This defines the process for early commissioning involvement, for definition of really 2 documents that define your commissioning strategy. The first one being your project commissioning plan, which is the first document that defines the commissioning strategy prepared during FEED or often even earlier during project concept stage. But whenever the overall project execution plan is being prepared, the project commissioning plan is one input to the PEP that defines the overall commissioning strategy at a high level in the early stages of projects. Then the second document to define your commissioning strategy, prepared a little bit later once a lot more of the commissioning or the design details are available on the project. This is your commissioning execution plan. So this is the second document that defines the next level of details in your commissioning strategy that really gets into how you're going to perform your commissioning on your project. So the first document, the project commissioning plan, really defines what needs to be done. And then your commissioning execution plan defines how you're actually going to do that in the specifics, the specific tests to be done, the specific definition of each mechanical completion and handover from construction to commissioning. Then we go through each phase of the project. So during design, manufacturing, and installation, what are the key critical commissioning inputs during those phases to align the project with a successful completion? On-site testing is, of course, where all the testing is completed. So this is where pre-commissioning, commissioning, startup, performance verification, all those good testing tasks are completed. How is that process structured and managed when you're planning your commissioning? Of course, we get to handover and in service. What does the handover process look like? How are assets placed in service? What does the commissioning closeout process look like? And then the last 2 documents are safety and risk management. So on our projects, we'll have an overall HSE plan that governs the project-wide safety aspects of the project. Commissioning obviously has input to that to define some of the commissioning specific processes such as HAZOP, SIMOPS, LOTO, those specific safety aspects that apply during construction as well, but also into commissioning to make sure that everything's safe as we're starting up our systems. And then the last one maybe the most important one, the one that's often overlooked the most on projects, is lessons learned and continuous improvement. A lot of projects are very good at gathering lessons learned, but they're often pretty terrible at applying those lessons learned. So what does this continuous improvement process look like? How can we ensure there's a feedback loop to the beginning of the next projects to make sure that we're continually getting better from a commissioning perspective, to make sure that projects are improving to deliver on time and on budget? So those are the 9 documents that are going to make up the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, and we're working frantically as hard as we can to incorporate all the feedback and inputs we've gotten from review teams so far. A lot of these documents do require a significant overhaul to make them more specific and more granular, that they're easy to follow and easy to implement. So that's what we're working on right now. We're adding all the figures to help make these documents easier to understand. As well, because documentation is so important during commissioning, we're creating all of the document templates that you'll need to implement this standard. So for example, if you need a template for a project commissioning plan, you'll be able to download that. You'll see the table of contents and exactly what needs to go into that document. You can take that template and update it specific to your project needs. Your commissioning execution plan, all of your checklist procedures, certificates, there'll be a template for everything that you need in order to implement this standard to make it super simple. What we want to do is basically give you a whole package, a whole kit here of exactly what you need to implement commissioning processes on your projects, making it super easy for anyone that's involved in commissioning. You can take this standard, you can take all the templates, and you've got a complete structured process to implement on your project right away. And we want to make this as easy as possible for you, because commissioning is not well understood on projects. And the easier we make this, the more adoption we're going to get to help people succeed with commissioning. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen right there. So some good comments here in the chat. If you have any other questions, I'll go into a Q&A now. So add your questions into the chat and I'll be able to answer them here. I'll just review what's in the chat here to see some of the terminology that maybe we should look at clarifying or retiring. Point of view and pre-commissioning, wet commissioning, and or hot commissioning. Often very confusing. I agree. I think there's better terminology that we can use to make the definition of those specific commissioning and testing phases more specific. That's something we'll be developing here very soon. I see pre-commissioning when there are individual tests, cold commissioning when integrated and could be possible with water, hot commissioning as some product or fluid. Hot commissioning can also mean electrically energized. Pre-commissioning is another very confusing term. It often refers to the flushing, pressure testing, leak testing, point-to-point measure checks done by construction groups before mechanical completion. Then yes, I've also seen pre-commissioning defined as the individual equipment level tests that take place after mechanical completion. So that's something we're definitely going to be clarifying more in the standard as well, to clarify what that means. We do still need to use the term pre-commissioning because it's a fairly commonly used and accepted term, but the specifics of exactly what we're referring to and exactly what that means will be defined in more granularity in the specification to make sure that there's no confusion. Handover certificate, acceptance certificate, yes, those are commonly used terms, and I've seen them mean different things as well. Does the handover certificate refer to handover from construction to commissioning? Does the handover certificate refer to handover from commissioning to operational teams? Does the acceptance certificate mean acceptance by the operating team, or does the acceptance certificate actually mean end of the warranty process, say 2 or 3 years later? That's oftenly a confused term, so we'll be looking to clarify that. Punch lists, that's a very commonly term, and that will be a term that we continue to use, but yes, some clarification required there as well to determine what does punch list mean during construction, what does punch list mean after mechanical completion during commissioning, to make sure that everything's clear. Greenfield, brownfield, those are commonly used terms, and definitely terms that we want to keep using. I think those ones are more understood than maybe some of the others. Greenfield being brand new construction, open site, no existing facilities, all new equipment and installations for a brand new facility. Brownfield, of course, meaning a plant that's already in service and is either being upgraded or expanded. Brownfield adds another level of complexity when we're working around systems that are already in service to coordinate shutdowns and outages when we're integrating new equipment. So brownfield projects are lots of fun. I like brownfield projects. Okay, so what is cold and hot commissioning be used for in all industries or specific industries? So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, those are terms I think that we're going to try and retire because they're confusing terms: hot, cold, wet, dry. And I don't know if they necessarily help define the commissioning process other than just add confusion. So we're going to be defining that a little bit more specifically during our dynamic commissioning process to make sure that those are well understood, rather than using hot, cold, wet, dry that often leads to confusion and leads to lots of questions. Could be good if we develop a flow chart. Absolutely. Yep. So that's definitely something we're working on right now, is all the figures and flow charts to map this out in the phases that exist and the terminology that we can hopefully standardize on during commissioning. So lots of good questions. If you've got any other questions, please add them into the chat. If you've just joined late, then unfortunately, our guest speaker, Adam McNeil, was not able to be here today. So we've been going through the commissioning standard a little bit, some of the terminology, and I've opened it up to questions. Anybody's got any questions, then by all means, shoot them in the chat and I'll get your questions answered. The problem I'm having lately, specific to renewables, is project management accepting a form of CCD to commissioning for control of areas. Yeah, the transfer of care, custody, and control is an interesting topic and very confused topic as well. So when construction is complete, what does that transfer of care, custody, and control by area, by system, sorry, not by area, by system, what does that look like in the transition from construction to commissioning for that staged and structured approach for handover by system? Often that's very confused as well, as the construction groups will think or feel that they still have care, custody, and control of a specific area that's been transitioned to commissioning, which is actually a very dangerous situation, right? If commissioning is working in a specific area and energizing systems, doing testing, and construction still feels they can go back in there to work on deficiencies, well, that's not a very safe situation at all. We need to be very clearly defining the boundary isolations for system handovers and then maintaining and enforcing those boundaries. So at mechanical completion, that's the formal handover from construction to commissioning, where then commissioning groups are then responsible for care, custody, and control of that system. What that means then is that if construction groups need to get back into that area, which they certainly will to be able to address type B and type C deficiencies, then they need to be requesting access to those areas to make sure that it's safe to enter now that commissioning is performing activities in that area. It has to be a controlled, structured process like that. We can't have multiple groups working in the same area. Same for respecting construction's boundaries, right? If an area and the boundary isolations have been defined, commissioning can't be energizing into an adjacent area where construction folks are still working. We need to make sure that the proper boundary isolations are in place, that lockout tagout is in place, so that anything outside of the area that commissioning has care, custody, control of is not being energized into and creating unsafe conditions in adjacent areas. So it is a very structured and organized process that's required. One, so that systems are completed and handed over in an organized manner, and two, to keep everyone safe. And this needs to be defined, how these processes work in our project commissioning plan, our commissioning execution plan, and HSE plan, to make sure that this is very structured, organized, and everyone is kept safe. So we call that the safety transition with color tags and signage. Yep, that's an excellent way to do it for sure. Tagging, color coding to make sure that everybody's aware that this has been mechanically complete. It is now with commissioning for ownership of care, custody, and control for further testing. That's a great visual way to mark those out so that there's no confusion. The limits of the punch list is usually confusing as operating team tend to request things that are not listed or included on the project documents. Yes, and that's why we need to define our project commissioning plan very early in projects, because as part of our project execution plan, our change management plan is defined in there, right? So these requests that are not within the current contract become wish list items or requests for change, right? So there's a process that must be followed for management to determine if those requested changes will be accepted or if they will be deferred till later in the project. If that's not very formally defined and enforced on projects, yes, that can get out of control very quickly, because if operating folks aren't involved in the project, which they should be very early during detailed design phases, but that often doesn't occur. If they're seeing a lot of these systems for the first time during pre-commissioning and commissioning and startup, then they're of course going to have an opinion or wish lists or likes and dislikes of how they want to see some of these systems function, right? Particularly if HMI screens, their SCADA systems, DCS systems are being upgraded. If they've used an existing system for 20, 30 years already, they're used to how those screens look, right? And if the new systems look different, which invariably they will, because they've got a lot more capability in the new PLC logic and HMI systems, then the resistance to change can become quite strong, right? The screen looks different. They're not familiar with that. This doesn't make sense. There's going to be lots of questions and concerns. And if those requests aren't put through a formal change management process, then commissioning grinds to a halt pretty quick, just trying to deal with all the changes. So you need a robust change management process for those requests to go through to make sure that they are in fact things that management wants to implement on the project at this time, rather than wait or defer those changes maybe to after the project, or maybe not approve those changes and say that that's a nice to have and not something that's essential. It's definitely a challenge on projects to get through that, and that's why we need robust change management processes to go through that. Good question. All right, Danny, catch you next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Paul.
All right, lots of good questions. Shoot some more in the chat, and I'll get your questions answered. And if there are no questions, then we can certainly end early for today. We'll see if our guest presenter can join us next time, maybe not. Or we'll schedule one of these upcoming in the future as well to hopefully go through the standard as we can get it released and make everybody comfortable with the documents and understand what we've put together. All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions. Why don't we end it there for today? Quick discussion, quick chat, and we'll see you guys shortly. Stay tuned for some further updates. If you haven't already, check out the Industrial Commissioning Association newsletter that we posted. There's lots of great information in there. You can see it at the top of this screen. There's that blue bar announcement, says December newsletter. Check it out there and see the updates we've got in our newsletter. If you've got any updates that you would like to include in a newsletter, that's always encouraged. Write an article and submit it to us and we'll get it included. And we'll end it there for today. So thanks for your time and see you next time.